What story are you telling? Whether you're intentional about it or not, you have an audience and they think in story. The Doug Thompson podcast features diverse storytellers sharing their practical tips for telling the story they need others to envision and trust in order to take a new action. Here's your host, Doug Thompson.
This episode of the Doug Thompson podcast was recorded from a live stream. The interview is here in its entirety. So, hey, everybody, I think we're live. So, thanks for joining this live recording of the Doug Thompson podcast. I have the honor of Mr. Mark Metry. It's not often I get to talk to a top 100 podcaster, especially one that's probably about the same age as my oldest grandchild. So
Nice.
This is like a little reverse mentoring, and I've looked forward to this opportunity, Mark, and thank you for generous giving of your time. So, Mark, I'm going to turn the tables on you. Ask that question that if you've listened to the Mark Metry podcast, which you all should have. How do you spend your time on planet Earth?
You know, it's funny because, most of my clients are like 50, 55 years old. So that's one thing. For me, how I spend my time on planet Earth, I honestly do so many different things, man, that, for me, the best way I describe it is, I spent every single day of my life trying to hide from the world, trying to hide my story, trying to hide who I was, not able to be myself, very socially anxious. There was a time where I was depressed, I was obese, I was suicidal. And now I just do the opposite of that, where all I do is share my story. All I do is help people go through the same exact issues that I face. So that's what I do on planet Earth. And then also I like cooking a lot. I like cooking great food. Today I actually went fishing.
All right.
So yeah, I was just trying to have fun, man,
Bad day fishing is better than a good day at work is something what I used to hear a lot on that. So were they biting today?
Yeah, I caught 2 fish. They weren't really that big though. So I had to release them, but there was a lot. There was a decent amount. There were so many. It was crazy, actually.
Yeah, it's fun just to sort of pass the time and get to do that. I've spent a lot of time fishing. I grew up in East Texas, so that and hunting. Hunting I didn't like because you had to get out in the really cold weather. When the weather's nice. So you mentioned that you mentioned a lot of your clients are older. I'm actually older than that demographic too, but that's a whole other story. But why do you think it is that you have that appeal to? And I've done this at work. I call it reverse mentoring. Because a lot of times the traditional vision of mentoring is this old dude helping out somebody young. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question. I think it's probably for 2 reasons. I think one, they probably read my book or they read my stuff and they're like, oh wait, I feel the same exact way. I'm just like this. But how did this dude figure it out, when he was super young? And so I think they see themselves in me and they see them younger selves in me, which then leads to number 2, which is like a lot of them have, I don't want to say regrets, but a lot of them were like, man, I wish I was Mark because that would have been me if I used my full potential. So a lot of them are like, have neglected their issues for so many years that they're at this point where like, oh shit, I have to do this. So then they see me, on wherever, my podcast, LinkedIn, they're like, hey, what's up, man?
It's
the biggest thing.
No, I mean, it's great that they feel comfortable to do that. I have kids, again, I have kids that are older than you are. And I look back and what, as a parent, you watch them grow up and you watch them sort of grow and mature and change. But I try not to set expectations based on other people, and looking back, I think saying, yeah, Mark was really great, and I could have done that back then, and I'd been the next big. They didn't have Minecraft, they didn't, but the situations are a little bit different. But the fact that you got to the point where you were hiding and you were doing these other things, I'm a little bit of an introvert. Nobody would believe that, but if I get in the crowd, I'm sort of like hiding over in the corner until somebody talks to me, and I get that from you a little bit too. That you can talk to anybody if they came up to you, but
For sure.
how did you? Where did you go to sort of addressing this? And you said you reached rock bottom. I mean, did you have some pit stops along the way where you thought something might go on and just it was too hard to change?
That's a great question. So, I mean, really for me, it was just like, I just like had no idea what mental health or social anxiety was. I just didn't think those things were real. And so I thought that whenever these things happen in my life, I was just like, oh wow, I'm just like stupid, or I'm just like this, and I'm just gonna be stuck like this forever. And so it really wasn't until I sort of like saw the science behind it where I was like, interesting. There's millions of people who literally have the same exact issue as me, and let me just try to see what they've done. Let me try to see stories, for example, of like what they have done. And so I think that for me was my first kind of step that I took on my road after I had reached a point to where I was literally suicidal, where I was like, man, this is like I'm gonna be a statistic. So I reached this level where I was like, you know what, let me be a good statistic. And it took me many years to climb out of, but it was a very brutal process for sure.
Yeah, and I've had failures and stuff, not to that extent that you did. I'm glad that you were able to turn around. But it's if you have to sort of get, as humans, we don't like change, and it's I guess it was somewhat of a comfortable unknown. You sort of knew what the expectations were, but to get out of that, and you had to have some fits and starts. How did you sort of, this is not, I'm not going to fall back into this trench. How do you sort of put your stakes into the ground to keep moving forward?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And to be honest with you, like, that feeling of like what you said of like to not go back, like to not go back to the bottom, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um I honestly don't really think I've had that. Maybe until some moments of like the last year during quarantine where like the world changed. I was like, oh crap. But other than that, I'm thankful to say that that's never happened to me before because uh really what I did was like because of the gravity of my situation, I really took everything so seriously. And this literally just became my life where just like every day I would wake up and I would learn and I would research how do I get out of this. But for me, I think the first thing that I did was again at that time when I was in the middle of it, I had no idea. And the only thing that I could realize was that at that time I like was over 200 pounds and I had gained like over 75, 85 pounds when during this period of me being depressed and suicidal. And so for me, my first step that I took was I just started to try to figure out like how do I lose weight and how do I become healthier. And then that led me down this path of learning about all these different kinds of diets and all these things. And then I eventually kind of stumbled on this concept that I guess would be classified as like nutritional psychiatry, where I started to learn that like your brain, when you eat food, your brain is what absorbs most of the food. Like a professional chess player, for example, burns like 6,000 calories an hour just through their brain, through that strategic mental cognitive work. And so for me, I just started to learn that food has a lot more to do with, how much weight you gain or your waistline, but it actually has a lot to do with your brain and your mental health. And I had never learned that. So for me, that was the first kind of step that I think, at least a significant step that I took towards, uncovering a lot of these issues. If that makes
Well,
sense.
I had not heard. I knew the brain was a consumer, but I'd never, and all the extra. I've done 2 Ironman triathlons, and I've done all the physical endurance stuff that's going on, but never did I understand that the brain would burn that many calories. So that was an interesting fact. How did the podcast sort of help you walk through this? I mean, so you're sort of
Yeah.
shy to talk about not being able to talk to people, and now you're on your second podcast now, which we'll talk about in a second. So we archived the first one, the Humans 2.0, which you interviewed. Of all the people that you interviewed, I can only think of one that you didn't interview that I would like to have had is Mike Rowe, because he's like the best storyteller on the planet. But I didn't see that one. But you've interviewed just about everybody else, a lot of people that I know and follow.
That's that's awesome, man. Yeah, it was definitely a crazy journey when I look back at that. Um, but yeah, for me, the podcast, like, I would say like it took me about like probably a year and a half of me just like living my life and just focusing on my own life and dealing with my social anxiety and all these things. And then I started my podcast really through, I think, just like frustration and probably even like loneliness, in terms of like, I was on my journey for about a year and a half, and it's very hard. If anyone's on a similar journey, it's very hard to go through that. And so I was like, I just need to start some sort of a system where I can just constantly get in front of people to learn from. And so for me, I started the podcast not because of like marketing. It was just like, hey, if I want to learn about this topic for my own life, then I would use my podcast as a way to, reach out to like the top 10 experts I could get a hold of to interview them about that topic, and just like honestly, just like selfishly learn. And that's what it was. And that was the best because it helped me a lot. And then it also, helped my skills as well, other skills. So it was definitely a crazy journey, and my network and all these things that happened as a result.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not a selfish journey, but you wanted to take people along on the journey, and your motivation to keep learning more about, hey, it's like doing a marathon or anything else. It's one step at a time that you're taking. And while you're in that moment, it's very small and it doesn't seem like you're doing much. But if you look back, you mentioned about it earlier, if you look back over this time, you can see where you were constantly growing, even if it was inch by inch, and it adds up to it's the consistency of working at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly it. And it was just like literally just trying to make every day count, and like literally just being in a spot where I would just wake up every day and, I honestly just, it just like became my life. And like,
Mhm.
that's what happens. If you have anything that comes in and just kind of like messes up your life, and you just like become obsessed with it, that's what happens. And so there's pros and cons with that. But, yeah, it was truly an amazing process, and I'm so grateful, and it completely changed my entire life, and I would do it again.
Well, yeah, and you would do it earlier. It was just sort of like me. I would start it earlier and do these other things as well. So, what you decided to end the 2.0 because what
Yeah.
you have your passion change a little bit, or do you think you sort of learned all you could out of the original one?
It was interesting. So I think for me, like when I started my podcast, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I didn't have my book. I didn't even share my story at that time. So like I didn't really understand
Mhm.
like what I would be doing. But then the more and more I evolved, I was just like, my podcast kind of went from, just kind of like I guess general like self-improvement, self-development, mindset stuff, to more focusing on mental health, to more kind of on social anxiety related things like confidence and mental health. Because for me, it's just like, I don't know, I feel like I've interviewed over 300 people, all different kinds of people, and I feel like that's the most important stuff that I could be talking about and using with my time and my purpose. So for me, it's just like a matter of like I just have to do this. Like I don't know how to describe it. It's just my purpose.
But I think you're true to what you did. The podcast was the original podcast was for this one growth time frame of
Yeah.
fixing that problem. I mean, you realize you were starting to turn it a little bit to doing something more important for you at that time to help you again continue to keep growing. So the rebranding and stuff, and it makes it a little bit easier for people that have that find it, and they need to hear that message and to go. So it's an evolution of what you've been doing, is what I hear you saying.
Exactly. That's it. And it's an evolution. And I had no idea. Like, and then you just take a step, take a step, take a step, take a step. You do that for a month, and then you're like, this sounds interesting. Let me like, go in this direction. And for example, like I remember when I got the idea to write my book, I was literally speaking in LA, and I used to have sleeping problems throughout my entire life, but I mostly fixed them. And then all of a sudden I just couldn't go to sleep. And I just had in my head like screw being shy, screw being shy. And I was just like, you know what, let me just write this book because it needs to be written. And so I had no idea I was going to be an author. I had no idea I would do any of these things, but step by step, day by day, next thing you know, boom.
Yeah, I firmly believe that all the stuff that's happened in our past, the struggles we go through, sets us up for whatever's next, regardless of how hard it is. The struggles we go through, it's for a purpose. It's to set us up prepare us for the next phase of life. Like I said, if you tried to write the book midway through your podcast, it wouldn't have worked, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
just didn't have it. So you got to the point and it matured to the point that you came on. So I want to talk about your TED talk a little bit because I did a TED talk too, scared the crap out of me.
Nice.
It wasn't the speaking part because I've spoken in front of thousands of people, and that never really bothered me that much. But I got into the TED thing where I had to. Some of it was environmental, because they were recording it, and I had to stand in a little circle. And I'm a pacer. I like going around. I like getting in the audience. So there's a lot of unnatural things to do. That was my experience. Scared the crap out of me, but I did get a better appreciation for those people that come to me saying they're scared to speak.
Hmm.
How did yours come out? Did you and what were your thoughts about doing that?
Yeah. So, like I went from someone who, had like tremendous anxiety, social anxiety to, really just like I would say uninstalling it from my system and going on this crazy journey and being able to be confident and literally being a speaker. Like I've spoken in all different kinds of cities and all over the US. I've spoken to hundreds of people. I've done it probably over 100 times now. And there's always still a little part of me that gets nervous, but to be honest with you, it's not really it's not a thing, it's not an issue for me anymore. Believe it or not, what I did have an issue with for some reason is I didn't have any problem speaking given the TED Talk, but um the day that the TEDx talk came out, it was through like a live streaming event. And for like just whatever reason, when that event started to come on live, it was a virtual event. For whatever reason, I just got so socially anxious and I was just like, I don't want anyone to know. And I just like didn't even touch my social media that day. I didn't share anything about it. So that was definitely weird. So I didn't have a problem actually doing it, which was strange. Not that I've had that problem before as like a professional speaker, but I definitely had a problem watching it. So I actually didn't watch it. So that for me was kind of the trip up that I faced
Yeah,
personally.
yeah. I was someone I couldn't watch mine for a year.
Yeah.
And the reason being is one, I don't like watching things of myself and all that. I'm horrible about doing that. But in my head, I knew the talk that I wanted to give was not the one that I gave, right? Because I played
Oh
this
man,
in my head.
that's the worst.
But but it wasn't the one that but as I went back a year later with the lens of, hey, I don't know what this was. I don't know what I perceived and watched it. It wasn't that bad. But
Mm.
that was my sort of challenge with it is I knew in my head it was different. It was a different track that was going on that what didn't match what I executed on. So again, it wasn't that it was bad. It was just they didn't match. Have you ever had that sort of disconnect between?
Yeah, that's such a great comment. I've had this happen to me twice. That I can recall of. I had it happen to me once in person. I was speaking in New York City next to like these other a couple awesome people, and I just remember walking away and I'm just like, holy crap, I sucked. Like I was just like, man, that was terrible.
Yeah.
And then looking back at it, no, of course it wasn't terrible. And then I had this other time where I was interviewing someone who I really looked up to and who had gotten me like really started on my journey on back on Humans 2.0. And during the interview, I guess I was just like so nervous that I just like remember when I was doing the interview, there were like 5 moments where I was like, oh my God, Mark, you messed up. That was the worst possible question. Like, oh my God, like everything is terrible. But then, yeah, but then I remember the next day listening to it, and I was like, oh, this is completely fine. Like this sounds great, And so I've had both of those that I recall. It's definitely interesting. I've never talked about that. I wonder what that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, well, it's some of our inner critic because we sort of build ourselves up, and we're always tougher on ourselves than other people are. At least I am, and I talk to a lot of people the same way. Is that and it gets in our way. In my TED talk, I talked about the inner bullying stuff that comes up to telling, hey, you can't do this, and in your case, you're too young to do this. How am I interviewing these other people that are made billions of dollars and all these other things? You sort of get this. At least I would get this little inferiority complex. And if you're in that moment, you don't have time to fight it, or you don't really have time to recognize it. So you sound like you've got a good handle on that now. You sort of realize when the bully's coming out and you punch him in the face to get back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I honestly, what I believe in personally is that um that bully is in there because of other bullies. That's not in there. That's not me. So personally for me, like I feel like I don't really have like an inner critic. Of course I do, but the way that I identify with that is that like, oh, this is like a survival, like my brain is a survival thought generation machine. And basically what it's doing is like it's taking things that it heard early on in my life that it thought was important, whether that was said by my friend group or my family or whatever, that I internalized. And then now my brain is repeating that to me in my own voice. And for me, that was like a huge lesson that I learned when I was suicidal, because I got like a front row seat of that, of like what happens when your brain really goes hard in the not so great direction.
Mhm.
And it's interesting too what you say about age, because like I feel like personally for me, despite what I went through wasn't great, but having social anxiety for my entire life, I was always nervous to talk to people. And so for me, once I started to learn how to get out of that, I then really realized that I have to put my mind in a different state of mind. And if I can put myself in a different state of mind, then the inner critic, everything else just goes away. It's just me in the present moment, and I can just deal with the moment as it is right now. And when you're in that situation, there is no such thing as, oh, this person's age is older than me or whatever. And like, I honestly, I mean, maybe sometimes that issue may happen, but I feel like I am never in a situation to where I feel like, I'm not good enough, or like my age is an issue. Because again, like I've literally been, I have friends of mine who are billionaires who are 60. I literally have clients of mine who are 50. I've been in boardrooms with all kinds of executives and CEOs and felt totally fine. And so it's one of those things where it's like, like if you've gone that direct, if you've sort of seen that fear
Mhm.
happen to you in real life every single day of your life for 10 years, and then you start doing things differently, you start to realize that, that fear is a byproduct of your brain, not really you. And I think that is like huge, because I think a lot of people, they associate with that. They think that's part of their identity. And maybe it is for some people, but I know for me, like I don't even think of myself as a confident or not confident person, because I just show up and I just am myself. And I don't really care if someone, thinks of me that I'm confident or not confident or so on and so forth, only because I have faced this issue for my entire life, because I know like my brain is going to put me in this cycle.
Yeah, you can recognize when the bully's coming out, and then you can take the actions you need to have. And I hadn't thought about it is the subconscious that comes into play as trying to protect us ideally, but I hadn't thought about from past experiences. But as I go back and think about some of the comments and stuff going through my head, do remember other people making a passing comment, and I took negatively or something about presenting or something that I could see where that would manifest. That's an interesting way to take it.
Yeah,
So I hadn't
it's
thought about it.
huge. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge. And like what's really interesting about that too is that like especially when you think about early on in the past, early on in the past, a lot of the times too, what's very common in people I talk to is that they'll have some sort of, I don't want to say memory problems, but a lot of the times they actually don't remember. And like I think part of the reason for that is a lot of times when you're a kid or you're a teenager, you go through something or you hear something and you're just like, I don't even know how to handle this. So then you take it and then you
Block
just
it.
like throw it to the back of your mind and just try to never think about it again. But I definitely think that can have a very, very long term impact that people don't really know. And I think a lot of times too, there's especially with guys, I think there's a very common pattern of just saying like, oh, well, everyone's been bullied, or like, oh, that was the past, you should just move on. And I think these things are sort of said to, maybe even discredit yourself. And yeah, I mean, it's not like you should be constantly thinking of your past, but whatever you haven't understood about your past still wants to understand you. And the more
Mhm.
and more I've learned is that like when we think about the past, it's not like this it's not like you look at the history of your web browser. It's not like this book where it's like a history book and you're like, wow, in 2000. No, your past is like this working organism inside of your mind and sort of your memory. And I think that's really important for us to realize, because there's actually different skills and tools and habits that you can do to actually change the way that you think about yourself and to actually uncover some deeper things about yourself that maybe have been suppressed. I had to go through it, and I'm definitely trying to figure out how to talk about this more. I'm not sure how, but I definitely think a lot of people face this. So it's interesting.
Yeah, is that sort of the mission of the new podcast, is sort of trying to work through these things yourself to help share with other people?
Yeah, for me, my podcast, like what it's really about is so far I think I've had 2 interviews out of 40 episodes. And so most of the episodes now I've gone from a place of just like interviewing people to be like, hey, what's your story? What do you do? What, with tips, all this stuff. To then now just trying to find like a very specific aspect. For example, like how do you go to sleep and you have social anxiety, or you face, any kind of mental, emotional health issue. So like what I'll do is I'll go deep into that issue and I'll actually like write an entire article, like an entire script, so that when I'm on the podcast, I'm actually just recording like a very like succinct 10-15 minute episode that is just packed with like the most important information that people need to know. So that for me is the mission that I've been doing through the podcast, to really try to create like a sort of what I would say like a library for people who face these issues. If they're like, how do I deal with eye contact? They can just search my podcast, eye contact. It's like, hey, here's how you deal with eye contact, social anxiety. Hey, you want to be a public speaker? Hey, here's how do you do it? Hey, you have issues with your digestion when you're anxious or when you're networking. Oh, here's what you do with that. So it's like an entire, my goal is just to create like a library of different sub issues within this, world, to help people and that are searching for it, and for them to stumble on my path and my stuff.
What's the feedback been on it? So those have been following you.
I mean, so far so good. I mean, I think last week I did get a 1-star review because the person said this podcast would be good if he didn't promote his program or he didn't like have ads. And he's like 60-75%. It's like, okay, I'm sorry that I've literally executed a podcast for 4 years and I'm literally going to talk about something for 30 seconds, 60 seconds so that you can listen to it for free. You can leave. Don't listen to my podcast. Take care. Other than that, the podcast has been great for the most part. The feedback that I've been getting, and it's awesome. Like for example, yesterday I was on a call with someone who has been listening to my podcast for the last few months, and like literally he just like would tell me like, I've been doing everything you've been talking about my podcast, and it literally changed my entire life. And like at this point, I'm at a spot where I hear that multiple times a day, and it's definitely crazy. It's definitely crazy for sure, whether it's about the podcast or something else. But I'm definitely very grateful.
That's sort of my mission, is that if I've positively impacted somebody, like I go to do a speech somewhere or talk to somebody or do a podcast that touches one person and helps change their life, then it's been worth all the effort and all that you put into it. I mean, just the one person. And it sounds like you're doing that at scale now, which is really pretty cool. So in addition to the podcast, and you talked about coaching, so here's your commercial that you can go ahead and promote. What are the things that you're trying to, because again, I talk to a lot of people that, obviously suffer to a certain extent or the same. And I can even see that myself from the stuff that you're doing. So what else are you doing to sort of give back?
Yeah. So, I do so many different things, but basically, for me, I help people show up in their life, in their relationships, in their career, no matter what that is, as just like the best version of themselves, where they're not going to stress themselves out. They have energy. They can use their mind, not let their mind use them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I've been focused on, whether that's individual or at like a group level, or in companies, or in schools or organizations. That's really the majority of where my work kind of lies. And yeah, it's so interesting. I've been on this journey for so many different years. I've met so many different people. I've been through so many good, so many bad things, and at the end of the day, like, I still don't really know how to promote myself. So I don't even know how to. I'm not gonna take you up on that commercial, but
Okay, well, you can go check out the website. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes and do that. You can take on. That's not a problem. But I do want to follow. I mean, because we're all on this journey. I used to. Somebody asked me what was my purpose in life, and is a mentor of mine that I had. And she kept asking me this question: why do I want to have a podcast? Why do I want to do public speaking? Why do I want to do that? And I kept coming up with answers. And it's one of those things where you're trying to reduce it down to the least common denominator. And I thought I had the basis. And I was out for a run one day, and it goes back, not to get a little religious on that, but Jesus, we were put here as Jesus was an example to serve other people, to sort of, not necessarily to be slaves to him, but to help other people be better, to help them improve. And as a society, we sort of lift everybody up to do that. And you're definitely doing that with what you're doing. And that's sort of and when I got that helped me realize that, okay, fine. That's where I said, okay, if I can help one person, that's my measurement to go on and do that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And, to go off then that Jesus note, like, for example, like when, like Jesus was, and I remember in 2018, I got the chance to go to Israel. And I went to Jerusalem, and I learned all these different things about Jesus. And there's actually this period where you could actually carry a cross through the same exact spot that like Jesus had to carry his cross that he was being crucified on. And I remember stopping and being like, that's such a great, example for life of like, take your cross and try to use it to help people, like take your burden. And for me and my purpose, if you were to ask me the same question, it's like, I want to take the burden that I faced of thinking that I didn't have a voice and facing the different issues that I faced, whether it was poverty or discrimination or bullying or any other issue. And I want all those same people who had those same issues to just like realize that there's someone like me out there who faced the same exact issues, but learned how to be themselves, unlock their voice, use their voice. And so, for example, that for me is my purpose. And I think it goes off great to what you said too.
So I was interviewing a woman. She was voted one of the top 10 IT people, security in Canada. And her goal in life was there was nobody in the role models that are out there. There was nobody that looked like her or that came from that she could sort of model and emulate. And I think that's what you're doing. You're talking about coming from that humble background and doing that in the shyness. You're setting that as there is somebody like them that people can identify with that can then look up and sort of help model after. Because there's a lot of other models out there, but you're filling a big niche, which I think will be very impactful for the world as we sort of move forward.
Yeah, thank you. And like that's the same exact problem that I have. Growing up in America as an Egyptian American, whenever I saw TV, nobody looked like me or even the people around me. And so when you go through that, your brain gets to understand patterns. And honestly, for me, not that there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but I honestly just thought I would work at McDonald's for the rest of my life and just be a loner. Like that's literally what I thought. And that's the path that I was on. And I'm so grateful that I was able to change that. And the reason why I was able to change that was not because I'm like special or talented, is just because I just followed a process throughout the days of my life. That's really it. And the more ways that I can communicate that process and make it easier for people to do and digest, that's my purpose. And if they, want to use me as a story or role model, I think that's also very important too, to look at people's stories and to learn. And I know that for me was a huge step as well to learn of like other people's stories that, were similar to me and what did they do? How did they make it out? So, and I also think that's, why your work is great too in helping people share their stories. So thank you for what you do too.
Yeah, I always say that everybody's got a story within them. It's just got to figure out how to unlock it. And you figured out where that was.
Boom.
Well, Mark, keep up the great work. Again, we'll put all the stuff that you're doing in the show notes. You're very humble on that. Again, I've watched you for years and listened to you for years growing up. As you were growing up, I've
basically,
been
yeah.
I'm still a 12-year-old inside, so that's part of my problem.
Me too.
My mind goes back to being 12. My daughter tells me that all the time. So it keeps
Don't lose that.
and I like staying in touch with different generations because that gives me a better picture of the world, right? Because I try not to be very myopic about it. So thank you for coming on. Good luck with what you're doing. I look forward to some more great things, and I hope to connect with you again in the future.
Of course, man. And mostly all my friends are older too. So keep it up, and I hope to connect with you too. And thank you to everyone out there for watching this. This was awesome.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody.